And we're live. We're 5 minutes late, but only the people watching live know that. All of you watching on the replay think it's just fine. Hey, Elisa Patience is here. Finally, my moderator, who apparently has a day job. What's the matter? I thought we were all YouTubers that work from home. Oh, no, we're not. Anyways, thanks for coming, guys. It is Thursday. We're here to talk about this big horn behind me, which is, of course, the Winds of Winter cover image that we have right now, the Horn of Winter. So George Martin has said that he's not finished yet. That's the gist of it. Basically, he said he's making good progress, and many chapters have been completed while he's been in social isolation, but that he still has, quote, a long way to go, which means that he's not just about finished, although, of course, if I was just about finished and I was him, I wouldn't say that until it was actually finished. The point is, there is still significant work to go. And a lot of people have asked me to talk about this, or when I think Winds will come out, all through the Ideas of March series, which stretched right on into April, that I did with Quinn's ideas, all about the Winds of Winter predictions. People are asking me, when do you think it's going to come out? They thought maybe we knew something that other people didn't because we were doing this series about the Winds of Winter. We didn't. No, we didn't have any secret information. And the announcement is apparently not imminent. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, not so much when I think it will come out, because when I think it will come out is whenever he's finished. But I wanted to talk about just the nature of waiting for somebody to produce a work on this scale, and also what it takes to write something here. So let's dive in with the idea of George as a gardener writer. That's where I want to start with. And by the way, I'm definitely taking questions and super chats all day. You'll see right here, there's a paypal.me/mythalastronomy link. You don't even need a PayPal account. That's to make a one-time donation. And of course, I get all of that. The super chat is also a fun way to donate. You get your name highlighted on the list there, and your question will get, answered very quickly. And I get most of that. YouTube does take a cut. So if you want to make a more generous donation, definitely use the PayPal one. But either any kind of support is appreciated. And of course, we have a Patreon. And we appreciate all the people signing up for Patreon lately. But yes, George is a gardener style writer. And this this classification kind of comes from George. I don't know if other people use it or not, but it's definitely how George sort of breaks things down. And it's not a hard binary thing, but he talks about architects and gardeners. And the idea of an architect is someone who uses an outline very heavily, pretty detailed outline. Brandon Sanderson would probably be a good example of an architect. Before he starts writing the first chapter, basically, he knows where he's going. He knows how it's going to end. He gets the whole outline done first, and then writes it out. Now, George calls himself more of a gardener, meaning that he doesn't tend to like to use much of an outline. I think he's talked about, and he likes to leave. Basically, he likes to have it not quite. He only has a general idea of where he's going. The rest of it is very, organic, you might say. One chapter leads to a next. As the story goes, he kind of tends to follow the story, follow the character, get ideas as he goes, and he's not quite sure exactly how that person's arc is going to go, only having a general idea of where it's going to go. And so the reason why he said that he does this is because if he outlines too much, he said it gets boring, essentially. He loses the sense of adventure. You think about like the sense of on the hunt, if you're following the stag through the wood and you're hunting it down. That's kind of the way that George describes his writing style. He's searching for his story. He's looking for the thread. He's trying to be true to the character he's created. And as the thing goes and changes, oh, one second, guys. Sorry if I gave anybody a butt shot there. My fan fell over and I had to pick it up. So, in any case, one second, guys. Okay, so in any case, the whole point of the gardener style writing is that George likes to follow the story. And that is fun for him. That excitement of not knowing quite where it's going to go is what keeps him into it. And he said that he finds he loses interest, essentially, if it's too pinned down and there's too much of an outline. Okay, so there's good, there's pros and cons to this. Let me see if I can tweak my camera. Sorry, my camera's doing this thing where it sort of fluctuates how it's looking. And yes, never mind. It's boring behind the scenes stuff. But in any case, the whole thing about a Gardner style writing is that it's very magical. It's a magical way to write. I guess that's how I'd start with the pros of Gardner style writing. Not prose as in poetry and prose, but the pros and cons prose. So the cool thing is that once it's very much like there's different ways to paint or make music. I think it's very similar to writing, and sometimes it helps to sort of translate it over to a different medium. So when you're a painter, you could start off looking at an image, for example, of a tree, and then painting a tree, and you sort of just copy what you see. Or you might have 5 pictures of different trees, and you paint some sort of a composite. You could also, on the other end of the spectrum, you could see people who, you've ever done that exercise, if you remember in high school art class, where they give you like a squiggle, and they say, start with the squiggle and make something off of that. And so that squiggle then defines kind of how the rest of it goes. And then you start filling in around the squiggle, and that gives you a shape. Where you might look at the squiggle and see, the side profile of someone's nose, and then it becomes a face. I would always take those squiggles and make them little tiny landscapes for my little stick figure wars that I used to like to draw in high school. But in any case, when you start with something, or I've got an artist friend who even takes like a piece of bark. Sometimes we'll, scrape away a flat piece and then paint on the bark based on the lines that are already there. And so that's kind of more like a Gardner style writing, where you start with something, like you create a character, you have an idea, you see this picture of the Starks finding their wolves in the woods. As George has said, that's the first image from the book that he got. And then you start following it from there. Once you've created the character, I think that George would say that the character takes on a life of its own. And then as you write the story, you sit there and think, well, what would this character do in this situation? And sometimes you don't know that answer until you write your way into that situation. And then you sit there and ask, well, how would this character handle the situation? And then you get a whole different scene. So it's an exciting way to write. I think it's very artistic. It's more like improv. Exactly. If you're talking about music, we're talking about the difference between improvisation and, something where you write out where all the notes go before time. I like both kinds of music. I like your Miles Davis, which is heavily improvisational, where they start with just a theme, and then they just work that, and Miles comes in with the trumpet, and then they like go from there, and then one person hears what another person's playing, and it all sort of riffs off of each other, and you get somewhere at the end, and it's a little different every time. And then, George is feeling kind of blue. Maybe so. I was thinking more like Bishop's Brew, but in any case. And then you have, like Tool. I love Tool. Every note in Tool is scripted out pretty much. Like you get your occasional solo or something that might have a little bit of improv, but pretty much it's all pinned down. It's more like a classical music, which is composed. And so. George being a Gardner style writer means that he's kind of likes the thrill of he's like a juggler throwing balls up into the air and just seeing how many he can juggle. And he's like, yeah, toss another one in. 41 POV characters, 42, and so that thrill of not knowing whether he can catch them all, whether or not he can handle all the balls, that's what keeps George Martin engaged, if you will. And so for him, just doing the same routine that he already knows he can do and that is planned out is not as exciting for him. So George is an improv writer, if you will, a juggler of many balls. And he's always trying to break his old record. He's always adding more POVs and adding more difficulty. Now, the thing is, this sort of exploratory writing, you try to think about yourself as a writer. Doing the Gardner thing is definitely easier with a small story, one character's POV. You can follow that character wherever you want. And if you make a change, it doesn't affect anybody else. But when you start to add more POVs and you have multiple plot lines, you've got Dany in the east, and you've got Jon in the north, and you've got King's Landing stuff. And then later we have Fagon and the just all the various plot lines, the Dornish people, the King's Landing, the Iron Islands. You've got all of these different things humming at the same time, right? And so if you change one thing, then it changes the rest. And this is where George got in trouble with, quote, the Marinese knot. Before, the Marinese knot was some bizarre sort of sex position or routine that Pod Payne performed with the sex workers in King's Landing. The Marinese knot was a reference to the knot that George rode himself into, the corner that he rode himself into. He had Dany in King's Landing, and he had all these people headed there, and he didn't know who was going to get there and when. And so he tried writing it different ways. And this is before A Feast for Crows, famously. And so what happened is there's two things that happened. He'd Feast for, the fourth book got too long, and he split it in half. But yeah, no, I guess the Marinese knot came when he was writing Dance with Dragons. So in any case, he's writing Dance. And like I said, Dany is in Meereen, and you've got Victarion and the Ironborn are headed there. Marwyn is headed there. Tyrion is headed there. Moqorro is headed there. And Quentyn, of course, is headed there. And so he's playing with the timing of when they all arrive and how it affects things. Is Victarion there when Quentyn arrives, or does Quentyn arrive first? And apparently he wrote this thing a whole bunch of different ways and wasn't happy with it and rewrote it. And this is one of the reasons why A Dance with Dragons got delayed quite heavily. And for those of you who are new to the waiting for George to release a book thing, like, this has happened before. The first 3 books came out pretty quick. The 4th book took a while. The 5th book took longer. And it was A Dance with Dragons that people were definitely waiting for, because there was a false start announcement. George thought he was done or close to being done. He told everyone he was almost done, and it didn't work. And there was much wringing of hands. Maybe quite not as bad as it was now. But point is, he does what he needs to do to get the story right. And since he's an improv writer, since he's a Gardner-style writer, he sometimes writes himself into corners and then has to back out and start over again and try again. Or he might rewrite one person's plot in such a way that he really likes it better, but now it means he's got to go back and rewrite this other chapter somewhat for this other character who's now affected. And so essentially, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think that anyone has ever Gardner-style written their way to an epic fantasy on this scale. I can't think of, first of all, there's not really hardly any fantasies on this scale at all, with this many characters, this big of a story. Wheel of Time is obviously 13 books, but there's only 6 POV characters. And there's other important characters, but there's only 6 POVs. And a lot of times, people are hanging out with each other. 41 POVs is really crazy. It's just a tall order. And so I think that is the first answer to why is it taking so long. It's taking so long because he's doing something unprecedented. And I think that people always need to remember that. This just hasn't been done before. Fantasy has rarely been written on the scale with this many POVs, if ever. And it's certainly, like, you would think that something this big would be done with more of an outline. And George is like, no, I don't want an outline. Outlines make me bored. So, yeah, so that's the first thing to appreciate. And the downside, obviously, to being a Gardner-style writer is just what we're talking about. It takes longer. Brandon Sanderson cranks out like 1 book a year on time every time, because he kind of knows where he's going more before he goes there. And so I think all of us here really love George Martin's writing. We love the way that A Song of Ice and Fire sounds. We love the language of it. And the thing about, okay, so I see someone bringing up Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and that's definitely a huge scale, multiple continents. So perhaps a bigger scale, like geographically, but you're not going to have so many characters woven together, because what Malazan does is it deals with certain characters in one book, And then in another book, it kind of moves away from those and deals with other characters. So you're never going to be having, 30 plus POVs in one book. The scale is definitely very large. And that would probably be some interesting comparisons. Malazan is cool, a little bit harder to get into. Yeah. And partly that's the reason, because you might get attached to some characters in one book and you might not see him again for several other books. So that's a little more of a challenge. I do like Malazan, though. I've read pretty far into it, but there's, I haven't read them all. So in any case, like I said, George is doing something pretty unprecedented. That's why it takes a long time. And what I was building up to saying is that that's the only way it can sound the way it does. It's the only way it reads the way it does, as exciting as it is. And I just don't think, I know that George couldn't do it any other way. And George is the only one who can write a Song of Ice and Fire. So there's that. But I really think that it's just the way that George has to write, because otherwise he's going to get bored with it. And if he had used an outline, yes, maybe it'd be here by now. And I'm sure George would probably be the first to admit that he could be a more disciplined writer. But, this is the way that he's always worked, and that's how he's produced all of his stuff. So the comparison to Tool is actually a good one. Tool's, it takes 11 or 12 years sometimes in between albums for Tool. And it's because the music they make is really special, and it takes a lot for them to come into that special place where they can write that music. And I think the same is true for George. When you're trying to intuit a story the way that he is, you're sort of just trying to pull it from the ether. I think it seems like George probably does have to be in a certain mind state, and I'm just speculating here, but he talks about, having days where he makes a lot of progress and other days where he doesn't, weeks at a time where he doesn't make much progress at all. So I definitely think that he's the kind of guy that there's a lot of voodoo going on here. He's not the type of person who can sit down and write one book a year. So I think we just all have to accept that we're on that ride with George. We're following this guy into the wilderness of this story, and he's trying to do something that, like I said, is kind of unprecedented. It's like he does know where it's heading, so it's not like he doesn't have any idea of how it's going to end, and he's just writing and hoping that somehow a conclusion will happen. He does have, obviously, a general conclusion in mind. However, how everybody gets there and how it works and how it all interplays, how the chapter reads, this is something that he really does have to just concentrate and pull out of the ether. So that's the first thing about George's writing style that I wanted to talk about. I'm skating through the comments here. I saw someone tag me a minute ago. What do you think about George choosing someone he trusts to finish A Dream of Spring if he can't? So he has said that he will not do that. But he has said all kinds of things that he changed his mind about. So I don't know. Obviously, I tend to be very positive about all of this. I am so in awe of what George has done that I tend to simply just kind of believe in him and have faith. And I think that, I think that wins will come soon. And I'm hoping that A Dream of Spring will come quicker, because, trying to write wins while A Game of Thrones was running, I think was a lot more of a distraction than George anticipated. He's basically said as much. So I don't think whatever House of the Dragon is doing is really going to compare to that as far as taking away his time. So I'm hoping A Dream of Spring will come quicker. I'm not sure. I used to think that maybe George would need 3 books to wrap it up, but I kind of don't think so. I think that 2 will work. I think that things are going to combust pretty quickly in Winds of Winter, because if after all these battles are won, so think about it. We've got these 4 battles coming, right? We got the Battle of Ice at Winterfell, which might be a 2-stage battle with Stannis, the Boltons, potentially Jon might get there after he's resurrected, but at the Battle of Fire and Meereen, of course, with Dany involving the Ironborn, Ser Barristan, and all the slaver armies. They're going to sweep through Volantis at some point after that on the way to Westeros. Then you've got the battle at Old Town. Euron's going to be attacking by sea. And then, of course, we're going to have Storm's End battle kind of happening, seems like off-page mostly, but soon after that will come Fagon attacking King's Landing. And so After those battles happen, and those are all going to happen in Winds of Winter, there's going to be a lot of pieces off the board. Think about it. By the end of Winds of Winter, you'll probably have Fagon and King's Landing. Cersei and the Lannisters will have slunk off to Casterly Rock. Whatever the Dornish were going to do, they will have done. Euron will have gained power. He'll almost certainly win, quote unquote, the battle at Old Town. I don't think Old Man Hightower is gonna whip out the magic staff and have a full-on wizard battle with Euron. That is something we talked about sort of playfully, but I don't think that's going to happen. Oh, did I sail right on through 4:20 West Coast time? Shameful. Shameful. Well, I'll come back for it in a minute. So then you're going to have basically, think about it. So you got Euron holding power all over the West Coast and the South. He's basically, he might just set up shop in Old Town. That's what I would do if I was Euron and I was making a claim to the throne of Westeros, as I would definitely take the Hightower as my base of power, and then you really have Saruman echo really strongly. So that's what I would predict, is Euron in power in Old Town and the Iron Islands, Fagon in power in King's Landing, Stannis or Stannis loyal forces, like some sort of Stannis Manderly alliance probably will hold the North. And I mean, who knows, maybe there could be a second wave of fighting where George takes the Rickon Manderly alliance and turns it against Stannis, but I don't think that will happen. So the North will be consolidated. And I mean, from there, you're ready for the attack of the others. You're ready for Dany to land in Westeros. She might land at the end of Winds of Winter, potentially. I do think the Long Night should fall by the end of Winds of Winter. And so Dany should be in Westeros before that happens, I think. And then so A Dream of Spring, you're dealing with the explosions at that point. You're dealing with the attack of the others. You're dealing with Dany and King's Landing and Fagon and Dany and Euron, whatever's going on there. And at that point, I mean, that's, we're whittling it down there. So I think that 2 more books should be enough. And I think that if George finishes Winds of Winter, soonish, and, has another 5 years, 8 years even to write A Dream of Spring, then I don't think there's too much of a worry that that George won't finish the books. George is in fairly good health, even though he's obviously overweight. He won't deny that. He's out of shape, but he doesn't have like health problems that are going on right now. He's not like in and out of the hospital or anything like that. So he has a very busy schedule. I told you I saw him live last year. He was very high energy. Like he's not like an old retired guy like limping around on a cane or anything. I mean, he's pretty vigorous. He's a fat man, yes, but he's a jolly fat man, and he's, like I said, he's running strong right now. He's writing with inspiration. He's getting a lot of stuff done. So like I said, I tend to be very optimistic. I tend to have faith in George, and just in general in life, I don't tend to dread things. Like if something bad happens, then you can deal with it then. But I don't know. I don't understand why people are, sit around and with the very dark speculation about, is he going to live long enough and that kind of thing. So I definitely think he will. And I think that George really wants to finish. I think it's the kind of thing where, he's going to hold on until he's done with this thing. If he's 90, like penning or I guess typing on his little word processor or whatever, I think he's going to hold on until he gets it. So we shall see, though. If he doesn't finish, then, that's going to be tough. And I don't think that he'll have somebody else finish. So that definitely will be sad, but I don't think that will happen. So right now we're worried mostly about Winds of Winter, and Winds of Winter is going to be a pretty dark book, guys. I mean, it's going to be the darkest book in the story, probably. It's going to have it's going to feel kind of like a Storm of Swords, Red Wedding style, Purple Wedding. It's going to have some of that Feast for Crows, barren wilderness kind of feel. I think it'll definitely have that going on. So when will it come out? Like I said, he's making good progress. I think that social distancing is going to be here for a while, guys. I mean, unfortunately, the numbers are going back up in most states. And so, yeah, the social distancing is going to continue. And so George will be, events will continue to be canceled. So George will be less distracted. He'll be traveling less. He's taking extra precautions, obviously, because he's an older guy. So, you know, the silver lining to COVID, I guess. I mean, George really will be forced to just work on this damn thing until it's done. And so there you go. And I know that finishing a book, he's talked about the joy that comes from finishing a book. So I think once he finishes Winds, a lot of times, this is an interesting thing to talk about. George has mentioned that when he was writing Dance and finishing Dance, he was really on a roll. And he wrote several chapters for Winds that didn't go in Dance. There's Dance chapters that got cut and pushed to Winds. So we had a big chunk of Winds done when Dance came out. And he said that he totally regrets stopping his writing to go around and do like pub for A Dance with Dragons and HBO Game of Thrones, which was just getting started when Dance came out around the same time. And so what we've got is essentially, you know, George has said, he's like, man, I was on a roll. I should have kept writing and stopped. It took him a long time to get going again after he stopped. And so I really think that hopefully he won't make that mistake this time. Hopefully that he'll finish the book and he'll feel very uplifted and, you know, relieved by finishing. And then he'll dive right on into A Dream of Spring. So, and it could also be that, like, you know, not every book has one of those bottlenecks. Like A Dance with Dragons had that Marinese knot. It had that problem in Marine of who to get there and when. Feast for Crows didn't have that kind of a knot that he ran into. So it may be that Winds has another one of those things where he's writing and rewriting, trying to figure out how to do it. And then once he gets past that, then he'll be good. Maybe he's got some, like, maybe the shit that he's writing is so dark and twisted that it's just like really hard for him to write. Because he said he put off writing The Red Wedding until the end of Storm. He wrote all of Storm and then went back and wrote The Red Wedding, and that it was really hard. So, you know, he gets attached to his characters, I think. And I'm not quite as pale as I look, guys. I am pretty pale, but it's definitely like a studio light thing. So don't give me such a hard time. I do go outside. I like the sun. I'm not in some sort of anti-sun cult. How are we doing here in the chat? Oh, I see some economic talk. That's interesting. Socialism and stuff. And taxation. That's cool. What a heady bunch you guys are. The true winds of winter are the friends we made along the way. Oh, I don't know. I think the friends we made along the way are the fire that keeps us warm during the winter. Yeah, you know, well, I guess if George, that's a good comment here. Let me put this one up on here. As long as we have wins, I trust the fandom and LML, of course, to come up with theories I like to satisfy the end of the story. So, yes, if George somehow doesn't finish the last book, then yeah, there's going to be a whole cottage industry of MFers like me trying to figure out how it would have ended, and the fan fiction will be plentiful, and oh man. George, don't do it to us. George, don't do it to us. I mean, I would love to make videos about explaining, you know, what happened on page after George wrote it. That's definitely what I'm hoping for. I do plan on making, obviously, you know, a ton of videos as fast as I can after Winds comes out. I have a ton of ideas right now still. Like, I've got more ideas for scripts and videos than I have time to make. But once Winds comes out, oh my goodness, there's going to be so much to talk about. And you can definitely count on me to tear it all open. I'll be going through, gosh, this will be the first time that a book has come out since I've had my actual podcast and YouTube channel. So, I mean, yeah, I guess maybe we'll read it together, chapter by chapter, talk about each chapter together. That probably makes sense. And then I'll get in on the symbolism and stuff. But man, I'm not even sure. I am getting ready to binge watch Dark this Friday night when it comes out at midnight. That's for sure. And yeah, I think I'm going to be doing a Dark live stream this Friday night too. That's probably all I can say for now. I'm still working on when and where and all that stuff. But yeah, Dark is season 3 is coming Friday at midnight. So yeah, I think about do a little pregame stream on Friday night. And yes, Elisa, definitely will do a TWOW book club. Reread podcasts, I feel like, it's definitely a good way to go through the story in a very granular fashion. But at this point, I guess I'm not really like, it's kind of tough to get into a reread podcast when we've all read the books like so many times. But definitely will be fun to read Winds of Winter together. Jim Bob's Arcade, Dark is on Netflix. It's a German show. Make sure you watch it with subtitles and original German language because it is way better that way. So Sick Podcast is the YouTube channel that all the Bard and I started. And we did one video, which, by the way, has blown up with over 200,000 views. But both of us really are into other stuff. And so we didn't have time to really keep the YouTube channel going. I thought maybe I could do 2 YouTube channels at once. Definitely too much. So I'm not sure if we'll use the channel anymore. Maybe not. Maybe one of us will use it. But yeah, if I do any dark stuff, it'll probably be just like a one-off kind of a thing, not something that I try to cover a lot because, like I said, it takes all the effort I have just to keep up with as much of Song of Ice and Fire content that I want to do. So yeah, it's the one with the kids in the forest and the caves and the time travel. Yep, that's dark. And it is seriously good. So that would be fun. Yeah, we'll basically just do a Q&A gab session about all things dark. I've got a few theories, and we talk about some of the theories that are around, all that stuff. So I'm going to take a second and peel through the chat here and see if I can pull out a couple questions about George's writing style, and then I'm going to talk about how George sort of is writing modern mythology, which is one of my favorite topics. Thanks for coming. Make sure you click the like button while you're here. Make sure you subscribe and all that stuff. Elisa, you're starting a YouTube series? About what? Tell us more. I would love to hear what you have to think and say. You brought so much to the Danny stream that we did together. And I'm having my Praise Garth celebration here. That's why the camera's gone. So, of course, we would never encourage illegal activity as per the YouTube guidelines. I live in California, so everything I do is legal. But nevertheless, we shall have the camera muted just for a second. I'm not sure if there's a point in doing that if I leave the mic on, but green screen madness. All right. Yep, not muted. Yeah, I know. I like to tease it a little bit. Jim Bob's Arcade. Well, thank you, sir. Oh, that is a cool icon there. Oh, Elisa, that looks cool. There we go. So Elisa's new series is going to be all about the fairy tale parallels in A Song of Ice and Fire. Very cool. The first one is going to be Danny. The second will be John. The third will be Cersei. And the fourth will be Arya. Oh, that sounds really exciting. Well, I will hype it up and share the links with you. So, let me see here. Stannis Baratheon has a good comment. Let me see if I can find it, highlight it. George said he was writing an Arya chapter, but he'd, quote, return to Braavos next week. Thoughts? Oh, could there be more than one POV in Braavos? Maybe that's what you're asking. Let's think. Well, Sam's come and gone from Braavos. Arya's there. I don't think Danny will go through there, but one of her emissaries could. Let Where is Tyrion? Tyrion is in Slaver's Bay with Dany. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's anybody that we could think of off the top of our head. Maybe somebody from King's Landing gets sent there. Because remember, is it Harris? No, who did Arya just murder in Bravos in the Winds of Winter Advanced Chapter? One of the Bloody Mummers, right? So possible that, you know, more people will come to investigate that. But I'm not sure who else would be in Bravos. I think Arya needs to leave Bravos pretty soon. So maybe whoever gets there is whoever's going to like kind of spring her loose. I thought I saw another super chat that I missed. There we go. Ray Riddle. I don't care if Winds is dark. I need to know what happens in the book version. I'm over at Game of Thrones. Yes. Aren't we all? Aren't we all? Yeah, I definitely think, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait till A Dream of Spring to really get a correction of the worst parts of the ending. And that's why I spent so much time talking about Dany and Bran. It was kind of the two most surprising elements of the ending. Because, you know, Winds of Winter is only going to have Dany just getting to King's Landing, I think. You know, you might get her confrontation with Fagon at the conclusion of the story, but I would think that's probably going to be in the next book. So we're not going to see Dany get to that point where she walks to the edge of darkness, you know, conquering the throne with dragons, sees the civilian casualties, and decides to go north, which is basically my big prediction for what Dany's going to do, as opposed to going north and then coming back and destroying King's Landing for no reason. I don't think we're going to get that reveal really until the last book, because that's all endgame stuff. So yes, do kindly impact the like button like a meteor impacting on the earth. That would be awesome. And thank you for coming, everyone. We got 407 people. I think we got over 420 people here a minute ago, so that's cool. Yeah, like I said, and so if you're new to the channel and you haven't watched and you're, like I said, burnt out on the Game of Thrones ending, the two series that I would recommend are The True Character of Daenerys Targaryen, which I've got right on my front page, and then the other one is King Bran, which is also right on my front page. Those are both playlists with several videos in them. The Dany one is a reread, and we're going through each book, all of the Dany chapters, highlighting all of her sort of moments of character, the traits that she's showing, the decision-making process that she does, in order to sort of compare that to what the show did with her character. And needless to say, what the show did does not make a lot of sense with the character that we find in the books. And then in the King Bran, so basically my whole claim on the Dany series is that if we really look back at the books, we see that her dragon nature comes out in order to protect people, not to like conquer and take what's hers with fire and blood. Like, the dragon is woken when her people are threatened, and she uses her dragon power to protect people. And she locks her dragons up when she's afraid that they'll hurt people. Sorry, guys, I got a tickle in my nose. Anyways, and then the King Bran part, I think this is the part that is really the hardest to understand. But it really makes sense when you think about the Weirwood Net download idea. And I'll just go into that briefly. So the whole point of King Bran is that he's supposed to be the last Green Seer. And whatever people think of as the Weirwood Net consciousness or the Green Seer hive mind, I think it has to come out of the trees, out of the Weirwood Net. Bran is going to be the last repository for it. And so he's going to be this boy walking around with the knowledge of all of history in his head, but he'll be the last person that'll be able to access that. And so then what you're going to have is basically Bran's rule will be taken over by writing stuff down, giving Westeros a real established written historical record. And from there, you might even see a transfer of power away from kingship to something slightly more, I can't believe it's not democracy, something slightly more, regional rule. I'm not sure how far George will go with that. And he'll probably just give us a glimpse of what Bran's rule is going to do. But so that's what the Green Seer King is going to be like. And I really think the whole Dany part of the story is going to wrap up first, and that Bran's going to become king essentially after Dany has sacrificed herself, I believe, to defeat the others. I think that's where her arc is going. And that might be one of the next videos I do. So the next scripted video that I've got coming out is going to be about the others and the symbolism of the Kingsguard. And then after that, I might go to House of the Undying's foreshadowing for Dany's endgame. I'm wondering how short I can keep that video. Hopefully less than half an hour, but that's some pretty heavy symbolism. So I've got some cool stuff coming for you, and I am going back for more Dany symbolic foreshadowing because I mostly talked about her character and stuff so far. Sean O'Donnell, The Giver, I don't know that book, so I wouldn't be able to answer that question. You're asking about Bran and Bloodraven, but I haven't read The Giver. So hit me up on Twitter and we'll talk about it. Ashara Starfall. Thank you, Elisa. Let me put that up on the screen. Thank you, Ashara. Love the name. What do you think of Lemongate? Okay, so Dany's from Dorne. So the whole idea is lemon trees. Dany remembers the lemon trees in the house with the red door, and Braavos doesn't have plants or trees or anything. However, what it does have is gardens in the courtyards of the wealthy, and the Sea Lord of Braavos is probably where Dany was, and he's obviously, he's going to be very wealthy. And so I think that's really the answer. And there's something about where lemon trees grow climate-wise. They grow better in Dorne, so maybe they're in Dorne. But no, I don't tend to buy that theory. I did crawl down that hole a few years ago to check on that, but I don't think Dany has a secret heritage. I think she's who she says she. I hate to be boring, but I think Dany is who she says she is. I think Jon is RLJ. Bloody, bloody, bloody. I'm sorry. That's just what I think. I did tweet out today on Twitter, by the way, and Luke, I see your super chat. I'll grab that in a second, Lucas. I tweeted today that I kind of think that magical bloodlines are a trope that maybe needs to go away in fantasy. The idea that either because you're the blood of the Starks or the Targaryens, or a magical bloodline, part elf, like in Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. It goes back a long ways, and it comes uncomfortably close to weird race ideas, about different races having dispositions, and a lot of that sort of line of thought has been used in some really uncomfortable ways. And if you think about your own life, like your family is important because of like the people, like you stop and think about your dad and your mom and your grandparents and all the work they did to get you where you are. And so in that sense, your family is important because it represents where you come from mentally. On a subconscious level, it's kind of your foundation. Your family, your friends and family form your sort of sense of belonging in the world. But you don't sit there and think about, I am the blood of the ancient Italians, and therefore I shall have a YouTube channel and conquer the world, or anything weird like that. Like, it's just not a train of thought that people have in real life. Like, whether you succeed or fail depends on, what you do and the choices you make. And George obviously talks about the heart in conflict being the most important thing, the characters' hearts in conflict specifically. What are the characters' desires? What do they have to do? And how does that motivate them? That's obviously the center of the story. And we don't even know if the magical bloodlines thing is important or not. Like, it could be all kind of a ruse. And the idea of king's blood, is it real or not? Does somebody get magic blood when they're elected king? Or is it passed down because they're the child of a king? Or is all that folkloric belief that people have that's not accurate? The jury is completely out on that. And I don't know which way George is going to go and what he's going to do with the trope. But in my own fantasy, I just really think I'm probably just going to do away with that altogether. And I'm just going to give us a lot of characters from different places. And it's just going to be their own history and their own actions that kind of matter. And it's not going to be somebody finding out that they're actually the son of so-and-so. That means they're the magical chosen one. I mean, gosh, hasn't that just been done? And so, like, I kind of feel like one of the things that George is doing also is, oh wait, I see somebody snotty in my chat. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. I think that what George is doing is essentially, he's putting a lot of these tropes to bed. That's how I think about it. He's doing medieval fantasy the hardest it can ever be done. He's doing it like to the nth degree. He's doing it like he's making it gritty. He's pulling all the tropes down into the mud. It's like, okay, what if you could really ride dragons? What would that be like? If you really had a flaming sword, what would that be like? If you got resurrected from the dead, what would that actually be like? And I kind of feel like after George is done with A Song of Ice and Fire, is there really even any reason to do like medieval fantasy? I mean, I'm not saying you can't do it or anyone that does it is wrong or whatever, but like as a writer, just think like if you're starting out and writing right now, why would you just do another Tolkien-like, you know, medieval fantasy? Like, I don't know. I mean, most of us aren't medieval, like historic fetish people or something. Like, I don't ride horses and I don't know shit about suits of armor and jousting. So like, I don't know, why would I write about that? So I'm going for like, you know, like Atlantis or something like that, or some Bronze Age. You know, my friend Quinn from Ideas of Ice and Fire has Tadia, which by the way, just crossed $35,000, which is the stretch goal. Yeah, it's right up on the screen there. So thank you for everyone who supported Tadia. Tadia is like sort of a dark fairy tale witch story set in, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a very, like I said, it's very dark fairy tale. And Elisa, patience, you're going to love Tadia. It is amazing. But it's a very original world. You know, it's got its own feel. You can already see from the artwork that he's released that it's like it's got its own thing going on. And like I said, I'm going for Atlantis, Bronze Age stuff. And I think, you know, N.K. Jemisin is doing some really interesting stuff. I've read stuff that's like using Arabic and like Egyptian myth. That's really interesting. So, I mean, you got to write what you know. But and that's why I'm going for Atlantis, because I see Atlantis as an opportunity to use sort of write all of my experience with the United States as sort of an empire nation. I can sort of translate that experience into, you know, imagining what an Atlantis-like culture might have been like. But the point is, to bring it back to George, George is like really putting this stuff to bed. Like he's doing it harder and faster and bigger and more detailed and more realistic than anyone's ever done. The Renaissance fantasy. That's actually a really good term for it. So, you know, do it a little bit different, like Scott Lynch with his Lies of Loch Lamore series. That's really interesting. You know, that's got a different spin on it. Pat Rothfuss with Kingkiller Chronicles. That's sort of like Renaissance fantasy, but he's thrown a major twist in it by making it this personal story of one person. And he's, you know, we've got the magic school thing. It's kind of interesting. So point is, like, going forward, like, we got to do this stuff differently, because George is just kind of, he's doing it. I feel like he's singing the swan song of this thing. Like, he's putting it to bed. And so I can't wait to see after this. I feel like we've got more interesting fantasy coming. So, man, my nose is just so itchy. A little bit of an allergy thing going on, maybe. But this is a meteor pendant, by the way. It is a piece of a Russian meteorite. And the other day, I was like getting stuff out of a box, and I whapped it up, and it hit me in the eye, which is symbolism. Hashtag symbolism. So, all right. I've got a whole bunch of tags coming. Did I say something bad? I didn't say anything bad, did I? Sean O'Donnell, I've been thinking the TV show could be better or truer to the source material if it was animated. I wouldn't mind an animated version. Yeah, that would actually be really cool. Oh, thank you, Elisa. Yeah, I've got 2 super chats to go back for. Let me go get those. I think an animated version could be really cool. The graphic novel looks awesome. So, Jim Bob's Arcade. Afghan vets went north of the wall. Jim Bob's Arcade sometimes says things to me that need a little bit more explanation. Do you want to elaborate on that? I'm not, there's a Song of Ice and Fire joke in there, but I'm not sure. I didn't pick up on it. So, and oh gosh, this is not, I have to use my other chat to go back and get the super chats. Lucas Von Hammond says, do you think George told Roy Dotrice the ending? I don't think so. I don't think Roy Dotrice is in the loop on that. And Roy Dotrice is dead. So rest in peace, Roy Dotrice. Ashara Starfall says, Oh, the Lemon Gate. I got that one. Okay, looks like I'm up to date. Yeah, Lucas and Jim Bob's Arcade. Thank you. Amber Reed says, would you bring in your ideas on the megalithic structures and how they are made around the world? Yes, in fact, that was the genesis of my idea to write pseudo-Atlantean fantasy fiction, is because my learning experience with mythology started with Graham Hancock reading about the ancient monuments, trying to figure out like let me get this. There you go. Trying to figure out how they were built. In many cases, the answer is just human ingenuity, and I don't tend to believe in aliens. But there are a few there are a few monuments which are quite vexing as far as explaining how they were made, how the blocks were lifted and maneuvered in a small area that were so big, how they were cut, you know, to the high degree of accuracy. And probably there's all legitimate answers for all that stuff. Like I said, I don't believe in aliens, you know, but there's just enough gray area in some of those ancient structures where it invites speculation. And there, you know, as to how they were made. Maybe it was a different kind of technology that we don't understand, you know, something that would seem like magic, but that maybe isn't. Maybe they had a way of defeating gravity that we don't understand. Obviously, there's the old saying, you know, technology that is sufficiently advanced appears to magic, you know, is as good as magic to people who see it for the first time. And so, you know, maybe, just maybe there's something weird. And what's great is that the stories about how these monuments are made are really wild. There is talk about all kinds of weird technology. A lot of it is singing. A lot of it has to do with sound, either chanting, music, you know, astral projection, all that stuff. So I've got my own little headcanon about a fantasy way to lift stone, to defeat gravity, to make monuments. So my novel will be full of that stuff. It'll be a full-on attempt of my imagination to run wild and fill in all the blanks of how an Atlantis-type civilization might look that has a different kind of technology than we do. There'll be magic, but I'm going to try to make the magic very grounded and very sort of occult and spooky. And there'll be a lot of astral projection related stuff, people's spirits detaching from their body and various things happening, spirit world stuff, witchy stuff, weird little experiences that people have and don't understand exactly. It's not going to be, you know, super high magic, I don't think. But I will have some powerful sorcery happening in there, but definitely going to keep it very grounded in the elements and stuff. So I'm going for a Bronze Age kind of a thing, a very raw, ancient. I'm just trying to make it feel as old as I possibly can. And I think, and if you go back about 100 years, a lot of the European, what am I looking for? The people that were into like the Crowley and the Masonic magic and all of that sort of arcana were very into Atlantis. And so there's some really fun ideas running around about Atlantis, just total pseudoscience, you know, stuff that there exists for me to pull on as far as like, you know, inspiration for a fantasy novel. It's not good science, but good inspiration for fantasy. So I'm basically going to raid all of the various Atlantis ideas that are out there about it being maybe Antarctica or maybe in the Atlantic Ocean, about it being tied to Greece, about it, you know, there's various things. There's the Plato myth gives the shape of Atlantis, and it describes it as a circular city with a series of canals and stuff. Definitely going to do something like that. So it'll be definitely be a lot of water going on. And I'm just going on and on about my Atlantis book. Okay, let's talk about A Song of Ice and Fire again. George Martin, writing styles. And I'll definitely be, will I be a gardener? Good question. Yes, I'll absolutely be a gardener. There's no question about that. I don't do instructions or outlines ever. I'm very much just stream of consciousness, sit down and type. That's how I write all my essays. I just, you know, that's how I do my music is all improv. I mean, I definitely write music, but I find it by playing. Like I don't write, I don't read music very well. I would just pick up the bass, find a sound, and begin exploring and try to find a riff and piece it together. And that's how I wrote music. So it'll definitely be a lot like that when I write. And oh, look at that, a $10 super chat from Ray Riddle. Thank you, Elisa, helping me out today, helping me catch him. Ray Riddle says, Jade City by Fonda Lee is so damn cool. It's an Asian godfather with magical jade that enhances fighting abilities, and it's set in a modern time with electricity, cars, and guns. Oh, that sounds cool. Sounds very interesting. I have tried, so urban fantasy is something I have thought about. A lot of the urban fantasy that's out there easily goes very cheesy and hokey. And the thing about urban fantasy is if you can find a good conceit, if you can find a good device to bring magic into the modern existence, well, it's easy to write in the sense that you're writing the modern world. You don't have to write about horses and swords and war and like things that you've never done. And maybe it's very hard to go. I mean, you can go horseback riding and get a little bit of a feel for that, but it's hard to live inside of a fantasy world. You have to do little pieces of it in real life, extrapolate that experience out. But if you can think of a way to do some sort of, when I say urban fantasy, all I really mean is a fantasy that starts off in the modern world and then somehow brings in, magic or the occult into it. Dark is kind of urban fantasy. It's more sci-fi than fantasy, but it's the same idea where you're starting with, modern times and then bringing in these mythological and magical elements and then having it go. Some of the Stephen King, obviously, stuff goes in there, but I don't, tend to do more horror-leaning stuff. Post-apocalyptic fantasy where magic is reborn from nuclear radiation. That one has been done a lot of times, Sean O'Donnell. Terry Brooks did it. A lot of other people have done that. And if the thing is, if you're giving a disaster that ends the modern world to give birth to a fantasy world, then you're really kind of right back to writing a fantasy world that isn't the modern world again. So who knows? Maybe if I think of a good urban fantasy idea, I'll do some short story or thing. But most likely when I start writing fiction, I will go right for the Atlantis stuff because that's the world that's sort of coming together in my head. I've got all kinds of ideas for it that come to me all the time. Muhammad says we still have magic working in Africa. Well, I certainly won't second guess you, Muhammad. That's out of my field of expertise. I am agnostic about magic as I am about religion. I'll say that. I do not claim to know what I do not know. Oh, here's a good question. Bringing it back to A Song of Ice and Fire. Do I say your name Rosie or Rocky? Maybe you can let me know. Lucifer means Lightbringer. How do you think the Skygosi will react to the return of the others? Will they send an army with Rickon, or will they sit it out? Are they first men and worship the old gods? Yes, I believe that they are. I believe that the Skygosi essentially are going to turn out to be not as crazy as everyone says. It'll be George playing with, the idea of racism and superstition and all that kind of stuff. There might be, some cannibalism that goes on, but of course, cannibalism seems to be tied to Weirwood stuff anyways. So essentially, yes, I believe they'll just be pretty rough first men. They'll be wildling-like first men. I do believe that we will see their armies come. Georgia said that he's going to have, Rosie, like the ship from The Expanse. Okay, cool. Nice. Or Rossi, I guess it would be then. But in any case, Soft C. What was I saying? Oh, the Skygosi, yes. I love to joke about, obviously, the horny goats. But George has said that we're going to see his, quote, unicorns, which he describes as large goats with an enormous single horn. We get a glimpse of one in one of the wolf dreams. And so, and also Don Quixote, right, of course, Rosie. So, yes, we're going to see the Skygosi. I think that's how Rickon will come back. I think Davos and Osha the Wildling, we're going to see from all those people again. We're going to hear from them again, and they will enter the mix. I do believe they'll be pretty. We'll be cheering for them. They'll be on Team Stark, I would expect. Ned's grandma was a Skygosi, so that's pretty recent. I expect them to take in Rickon enthusiastically and enter the fray on Team Stark. They'll probably try to protect Rickon and there'll be some sort of tragedy. Rickon probably will die and, you know, be used as a political pawn, unfortunately. But I don't want to say too much about Rickon because we still have a Winds of Winter prediction video about Rickon to come, Quinn and I. So Dresden Files. No, I have not. Sorry, I had to cough break there. Cough button. So the other thing about George's writing style, those of you who watch my channel more often probably hit to the idea that there's a whole layer of symbolism and mythology that sort of runs underneath the narrative. And this definitely, I think at times it makes it easier for George to write, and I think at other times it maybe takes more time. Like, for example, there's so many scenes that I've broken down and shown that there's a whole symbolic play going on. And essentially what George is doing is he's writing in the same way as mythology is written. So let's take the alchemical wedding, right? The one where Dany walks into the pyre, wakes the dragons. And I can actually put that one on my background. Just go over to green screens here. Delete one so I have room to add it. And let's see if I can quickly find it. Oh, I think I did. Oh, well, that's not the one I was looking for, but that'll work. There's Dany. So in any case, this scene is symbolism. And, oh, Jim Bob's Arcade. Thanks, buddy. And let me actually, I do want to find the other picture so I can actually show you the symbolism. But the point of writing books like mythology, guys, is that mythology, there's always a hidden layer to mythology. That's why the stories are so strange. That's why they don't always make sense at first. It's because it's not meant to be taken literally. And you can take any parable-like story, and it's gonna work that way. So, for example, the story of Job. I always like to use the story of Job when I talk about Bible stories, just sort of to prove that most of that is meant to be metaphor. So the story of Job, Job gets swallowed by a whale. And for 3 days, he's in the whale. And he gets swallowed by the whale because he jumped overboard from a boat because he was running from the calling that God gave him, and he wasn't doing what God told him to do. And so once he was willing to go and preach to the city that he had to go to, then he got spit out of the whale and he went on his way. Now, human beings can't live inside of whales. That's obvious. I'm talking about, yeah, Jonah. What did I say? What did I say? Did I say? Sorry. I do know my Bible stories. What? Oh, I say Job? Yeah, Job is different. That's totally different. I'm sorry. We're talking about Jonah. Reset. Jonah. The guy who got swallowed by the whale. I mean, it works for Job too. Job's also a metaphor. But let's stick with Jonah because that one's easy. People can't live inside of a whale for 3 days. That's impossible. So did that happen by magic? Probably not. But it's a metaphor. The belly of the whale is a great metaphor, and it's used by authors all over the place. And the whole point of the story is that he was running from what he was supposed to do. And if there's something that you know you need to do and you run from it, then your life gets harder. And then you turn around and finally face the truth or the thing you need to handle or whatever. You deal with it, and then you go on, you move on with your life. So it's a metaphor, right? And A Song of Ice and Fire is not that metaphorical. Like, the point isn't completely the hidden meaning. A Song of Ice and Fire is primarily a story, like most stories. You're supposed to read the characters and enjoy what they do and think about it as, people making decisions and whatever. But if you go to these, many of the climactic scenes are written with a complete symbolic message underneath of it. And this is a layer of detail that I don't think most people write with. And this is one reason why it's taken longer. So I really wish I could get my nose to stop itching, but it just won't. Sorry, guys. In any case, this scene behind me, this is Khal Drogo's pyre. And you can see right here, that is Dany's head. She's walking into the pyre. And so, as you guys know, the whole Leah, I'm waiting for that. No, I don't do cocaine. I've never done cocaine in my life. I'm very anti-powder drugs. I only smoke and occasionally do psychedelics. So it's really just an allergy thing. But thanks anyway. In any case, this is symbolism right here. This is HBO accidentally created the image of an eclipse. But that is the whole point of calling Drogo the sun, Dany's sun and stars, and Dany is the moon of Drogo's life. Drogo represents the sun, and Dany represents the moon. And so this pyre behind me is the fire of the sun. It's Drogo is the solar king, and he is lit on fire. So now he is a burning solar king. And we've got Dany, who is like the moon of Drogo's life, and she's walking into the fire of the sun. This is like a conjunction. It's like an eclipse. And then, of course, we have the story given in a Game of Thrones. One day the moon wandered too close to the sun, the second moon that is, and it cracked from the heat. They kissed the sun and it cracked from the heat, and all the dragons poured forth, and that's where dragons come from. And so we see basically this scene being reenacted here with Dany, the moon, wandering too close to the sun, and then the dragon eggs crack and the dragons are born. And so this is one of the first scenes that I figured out. I was like, whoa, there's a whole symbolic drama play happening here underneath the action. But of course, it turns out all the major scenes are showing us various things. It's not always the long night, moon and sun conjunction. Other times it's having to do with Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa, more of the interpersonal part. Other times we see stuff about green men being sacrificed and resurrected. There's all kinds of stuff that gets played out via symbolism. But the point is, my whole podcast is essentially works on the premise of highlighting all of these sub-layers of archetype, myth, symbol, and drawing them out. And they complement the story. They enhance the story. They help us see A Song of Ice and Fire in the family of classic stories of world mythology and world culture. That, I presume, takes a little more effort. You have to think about things. You can't just, make stuff happen. Like, you have to think about the implied symbolism of everything. Like, if you call Dany a moon and you call Drogo the sun, every time they do stuff, you have to think about what that could be implying with the moon and the sun. And Martin gives us clues. Like, when he wants us to think about them as representing the moon and the sun, you'll see that language played up in the scene. Be like, hey, they're representing these people. But it happens a lot of times. So you really do have to pay attention. And, okay, so here's a fun one. Let's rip on D&D for a minute. So going back to season 8, Game of Thrones, the first one gave us the famous bloody burning corpse spiral, right? Beric and all them, they go to the last hearth and they find this horrible, freaky mandala on the wall. It's made out, there's one kid nailed to the umber air is nailed to the wall, and there's this spiral arm of corpses all around him. And then Beric stabs it with his flaming sword, and the whole thing catches on fire. And it's just like explosion of symbolism, right? I made 3 videos in the next couple weeks all about what it represents, because they'd previously shown us a weirwood tree surrounded by the same spiral with 8 arms. And of course, weirwood trees are like corpse trees because their hands are like their leaves are like bloody hands, and they have bloody faces carved into the tree. And then we see this spiral, which, like we said, we've seen that over the weirwood tree, and it's made of corpses. And then we see a flaming sword stab the symbol of the weirwood tree, and it all lights on fire. And there's a lot of stuff about weirwood trees lighting on fire. And the weirwood trees and Lightbringer are both fire of the god symbols. So I went crazy and was like, dude, Game of Thrones is doing symbolism, and they're telling us what's going to happen with symbolism. And no, no, it turned out not at all. They were just like, oh, that looks cool, so let's do that. And so what they were doing is essentially they were playing with things, with symbols that have a lot of meaning, but because they didn't bother to think about what those symbols meant, they were like kind of like children taking letter blocks and like just playing with them, right? And they accidentally spelled a word, and people were like, "Oh, you're doing symbolism, right?" And then it's like, "No, these are just blocks. What do you mean?" So that's essentially what happened. They don't understand the language of symbolism or chose not to pay attention to it. And then they used a bunch of powerful symbols and implied a bunch of stuff that then didn't have anything to do with anything. And it was very nonsensical. So George might be unique in the degree, like how far he goes with his use of symbolism, but he's not unique in this at all as far as just using that language. Tolkien did it a lot. Tolkien has all kinds of cool astronomy symbolism layered into his stories. He uses archetypes very heavily, both his own archetypes and ones pulled from Norse mythology and classic mythology. I would say that most skilled authors, whether it's a writer of a movie or a book, have to understand symbolism at least somewhat. And if you're using powerful symbols like burning trees or crosses or resurrected people or the moon or anything like that, it's incumbent upon you to do a little research and understand what you're implying symbolically. And if you don't do that, then your story is going to kind of be kind of flat and kind of shallow. Adding all these mythical layers, these symbolic layers, it adds depth to the story. But even for the people who never really like get into decoding it and analyzing it like we do on this channel, will still enjoy the benefits of the richness that all of this stuff brings to the story, because your subconscious reacts to these symbols, like the one behind me, or like the burning tree, or like a tree person, or like the crucified man or the hanged man. Any of these things, burning cross, that's a different symbol. Did I say I hope I said burning tree, not burning cross. Yeah, no, the burning cross is it's a powerful symbol, a very different symbol though. And they see that was an intentional one. That's one where they knew, that's a very intentionally chosen symbol. And of course, the cross itself is one of the most powerful symbols in history. It's been used all kinds of different ways and in variations. And it's just a variation on the mythical world tree, actually, anyways. Because of course, if you think about Odin had a very Jesus-like crucifixion / hanging on his tree, but it wasn't on like a wooden cross, but an actual tree. It was on Yggdrasil. That's where he was essentially crucified is. And we see Bloodraven, a kind of slow motion crucified, in that he's being pinioned and tied to the tree like Odin was tied to the tree in order to transcend death. And of course, Jesus died on the cross and then resurrected again. So he's doing a death transcendence routine as well. So if you're writing and you're using a big central tree or a magical tree, you can't just write a magical tree and write whatever you want about it. Like, you need to do research and think about all the other magical trees that have been out there and understand, like, what kind of symbolic language you're doing. Flaming sword, that's another one. George has obviously researched every flaming sword that there is, from the one, guarding the Garden of Eden, to all the flaming swords wielded by famous heroes, Arthur's Excalibur. I've talked about, obviously, Elric and Stormbringer. All of these magical swords are influencing Martin. And so Martin creates Lightbringer very much like the next member of a family. And that's what these archetypes are. They're kind of like a mythical family. And so when we compare Daenerys to figures from mythology, we're sort of showing the mythical family that her character comes from. And that's why it's so much fun to write this way. And it creates an experience that is unique. I mean, A Song of Ice and Fire is really going to hold up over time. It'll hold up better if George finishes it. But of course, it's going to be looked at as a great work of literature in the same way that Tolkien's work is. So I really think that in the future, people will be studying it in more detail, just like kind of what we're doing here. And that's actually happening already. There are many college courses around the world where professors are using Song of Ice and Fire as a teaching tool. So yeah, it is happening. You guys must be entertained by everything I'm seeing. I'm not seeing a ton of questions today. Which characters am I most excited to read? Well, I have talked about all of them in the Winds of Winter prediction videos, and I find that I pretty much like all of the characters, because the thing is, the stuff that I read A Song of Ice and Fire for, a lot of times, like the myth and the symbolism, it comes in very random chapters. George loves to give us hints about mythology and symbolism in chapters that are like, he'll give you Azor Ahai clues in non-Daenerys chapters, because to put them all in Daenerys chapters would be too obvious. And we get Weirwood clues in Asha Greyjoy's chapter when she's in the woods. So, oh my goodness, it is 4:20, whatever time zone is west of California, which is not quite Hawaii. So somewhere in between California and Hawaii, it is 4:20. And we have 420 viewers. And so I'll be right back. Definitely time for the smoking glasses. Ah, yes, thank you. Yeah, I could be a couple minutes late for 4:20. That's the whole thing about 4:20. Is like you just had to be close. Approximately. All right, so somebody named Camilo is trying to get my attention. Question. You had to tag me. Sometimes on mobile you can't do the tagging, but if you type @ and then start typing Lucifer means Lightbringer, it will tag me and it will be highlighted, and I will be more likely to see the question. Quinn is out right now. Yeah, he's more of a joint guy. I'm more of a bong guy, so we meet in the middle somewhere. Yeah, somebody tell me what the name of the time zone is where it's 4:20, just off the coast of California. Like, what island is that? Or maybe is that like somewhere in South America, or I don't know. Anyways, we might have just smoked one for the Merlings in the Pacific Ocean. All right. So, modern mythology, George is writing it. I have an essay about this on my website. It's under the methodology tab, actually, but I'm going to share it right now, and I might read off a couple of things from it, because when I say that George is writing myth, it actually means a little more than it sounds like it means. And here's the link. It's a short little essay. I mean, it's like 15-minute read or something, guys. And I'm not even going to do the whole thing right now. But here's the deal. So this is all about Joseph Campbell. And this is from a book about Joseph Campbell. Campbell believed that in the modern world, the function served by formal traditional mythological systems has been taken on by individual creators such as artists and philosophers. In the works of some of his favorites, such as Thomas Mann, Pablo Picasso, and James Joyce, he saw, and later George Lucas, by the way, he saw mythological themes that could serve the same life-giving purposes that mythology had once played. So this is kind of getting into what I'm going to write about in my Lucifer Means Lightbringer book. But what he's talking about is symbolic art, metaphor, symbol, and whether it's music or visual art or stories, there's all of these art forms can be used metaphorically to touch on the sacred concepts, the old universal concepts that humans have always had. And so what he's kind of saying is that, like, in the past, it's been religion and mythology which kept humans always thinking in terms of metaphor and symbolism, not always thinking literally, because thinking in terms of rational, literal existence is very different from the way that you have to think in terms of symbolism and myth. You can't, they're just totally different ways of thinking about stuff. Like, when you're thinking literally and rationally, which I was using my left hand for, then truth is objective. Okay, when you're dealing in the realm of science, things are either true or false, pretty much. There's quantum mechanics, which is a little bit weird, but for the most part, you prove things become established fact when multiple people can demonstrate the same thing all around the world. When you're talking about symbolism and myth, it's this totally different idea of, quote, truth. Truth is whatever idea speaks to you and empowers your spirit and speaks to the core of your being. And that's what Joseph Campbell talks about. So some people really struggle with that, but it's very important to keep alive the tradition of symbolic and metaphorical art, because we as humans, it's important that we continue to think that way and relate that way. And what Joseph Campbell has basically believed is that modern storytellers are taking that same rule as old mythology. And George Martin is right at the forefront of that. And Joseph Campbell was big friends with George Lucas. And George Lucas pretty intentionally wrote Star Wars as modern mythology. And it definitely functions that way. So that is what is cool about all of that. Hey, there's Camilo. Oh, she tagged me. All right. Let me get your question there. I know you've been trying. Hey, are you excited to see the House of the Undying visions represented in this month's A Clash of Kings graphic novel? Oh, yes, I am. I definitely am. I've been following the graphic novels. I do use some of the art from the graphic novels. So I don't follow them that closely. So you're saying they're about to do the Undying. That's very exciting. Maybe I should wait for them to do that before I do my Undying video. So I'll have more, more pictures to use. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. Thanks, Camille. That's awesome. All right, so I saw a few tags here. Let me go ahead and see if I missed any questions. So Warren Blythe is asking if I've dived deep on blood magic. I went the deepest on blood magic in my Great Empire of the Dawn Dracomorph series, which is all about blood of the dragon and weird blood magic experiments. Not too much from a Weirwood angle. The Weirwood side of the blood magic I've talked about in the Sacred Order of Green Zombies series and the Weirwood Compendium series. Barrel Rider asks, I was listening to Green Zombies today, speaking of, and I think that Bran definitely is going to do something about getting Jon's spirit in his body again. Yeah, I totally agree, Barrel Rider. And looks like you've got a second part to this comment. Let me see if I can find it. I totally agree that I think Bran is going to be involved. Bran has been reaching out and touching Jon's spirit on a couple of occasions, and I think that that'll happen again. I think that when Jon is dead and he's wandering the afterlife, Bran might help guide him back, or Bran literally might use his magic to help resurrect Jon, and that could be why he's a little better of a zombie, if you will. And it could be that Cold Hands, for example, was resurrected with Green Seer magic. The more I think about it, the more I like the idea that Jon's body is temporarily going to be whited and controlled by the others, and that the struggle will be to get control of it back. Because Cold Hands, think about it, Cold Hands is a cold white. He's not a fire white like Beric. He's not running on R'hllor power. He's animated by ice magic. But we've always seen ice magic being under the control of the others. And so it stands to reason that something like on the TV show, what happened with Benjen happened to Book Cold Hands, meaning he was temporarily otherized and then saved or turned back, and he was given control of his body again. And so I like the idea that will happen with Jon. So if he's temporarily whited, it might not be enough to just use R'hllor power. Maybe R'hllor power could just burn out the other's energy. But I like the idea that Bran will be involved. So yes, there's so much room for speculation there. My brain's getting excited thinking about it, but I should make up some actual theories about that. We'll see if something comes to me. Will you do a follow-up for the Signs and Portals series? Henbot asks. And you spoke more about the Weirwood Goddess. Yeah, so the Weirwood Goddess is done, but I'm pretty much picking up some of the Weirwood Goddess ideas in Signs and Portals are intended to. And the purpose of Signs and Portals was to drill down to the truth of Night's Queen. I'm looking at her as an icy counterpart to Nissa Nissa. We're trying to figure out, is she Nissa Nissa come again? Is she related to Nissa Nissa? Like Nissa Nissa is a child of the forest. Maybe this is another child of the forest, Nissa Nissa's pissed off sister. But there's a lot of evidence pointing to the idea that Night Queen might be Nissa Nissa's spirit coming back out of the Weirwood, or just living inside the Weirwood. Maybe that whole Night's Queen, Night's King story happens inside the Weirwood net, not out on the physical world. That's where Night's King sees his woman. Ball the Bard's got some really cool ideas about that. She's going to write about at some point. So, yeah, I don't know when I'll get back to that Henbot, but it's possible that I might wait for the next book even before I go back to that, because I kind of stumped myself. I wrote ahead a little further in that series, and I really don't know. I stumped myself in a couple places and was hoping some clarity would come to me, and then went writing off in a different direction. So it's possible that when we get another book, we can see more Sansa stuff in the Vale and some more Weirwood Goddess action, that then I'll be able to tell where that's going, and I'll come back to that. What's going through my head when I read the first book when you first read a book like A Song of Ice and Fire, when did the connections begin to form? Well, when I started reading A Song of Ice and Fire, I didn't have my symbolism glasses on yet. I read the series once or twice before I started figuring things out. And it was definitely that myth about the moon meteors or the dragons coming from the moon where I started putting things together. Now when I read news stories, I'm basically kind of listening and looking for signs of symbolism, for signs that the author is using archetypes and symbols to say things. And once I pick up that he is, or she is, obviously, then I will begin going back over it and looking hard. And this stuff then comes out pretty quick, honestly, because once you recognize these symbols, I mean, it's probably happening to all you guys when you watch movies nowadays. You probably watch a movie and start thinking like, oh, well, wait a minute, what's that snake and a rod? That's the rod of Asclepius. What's that? What's that talking about? Or, this could be a Garden of Eden parallel, or whatever. So once you develop those sort of glasses, if you will, then it's pretty easy to start picking it out. And once you catch on to a line of thought, of symbol in a story, then usually it starts unraveling pretty quick. So Jim Bob's Arcade hit me up with the number 420. Thank you. One of my two faves. Well, thanks there. I appreciate that. Let's see here. Yeah, and clearly George R. Martin already very influential in culture, definitely. And what I would like people to take from his writing, and I know there's a lot of aspiring authors out there in our fandom community, it's the unreliable narrator that we should all be copying more than anything else. You know what I mean? Like, it should, like, the idea that don't write that sentence that's like, and little did he know that would be the last time he would ever see blah, 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 blah. Like, that omnipotent narrator stuff is so played out. It's very ham-fisted. It's kind of like telling the reader what to think. I go back and read some of my old, stuff that I read when I was a teenager, and it really seems like YA in the way that they like spoon feed you what everybody's supposed to think, what you're supposed to think about everything. Using the unreliable narrator is such an interesting tool. It makes everybody the hero of their own story. And like when you're reading a Victorian or a Theon chapter or a Cersei chapter, you really realize that you're reading the train of thought of somebody who's like not quite right, or it's very delusional because of egomania, or in Victorian's case, his whole worldview is just alien to our worldview. George is literally trying to write like, a Viking dude bro who literally believes in the drowned god, and so it's a fun way to write. It's a fun way to read characters, and it allows the reader, it makes the reader work. This is the key thing about the unreliable narrator, is it instead of sitting back on the couch and watching TV and just having the images come at you, you're drawn into the story because you have to think about everything. You have to think about, what is Theon thinking? Like when Cersei's paranoid about the Tyrells, we have to sit there and try to separate out, well, the Tyrells definitely are schemers, and they're definitely looking out for themselves, and they're in a very uneasy alliance with the Lannisters. But at the same time, Cersei is kind of crazy and is paranoid of like her own family, and basically doesn't know how to have an ally. And so when we're reading Cersei's chapters, it's like a little bit of both. Like sometimes she's right to be suspicious of the Tyrells. Other times she's being stupid and shooting herself in the foot and not, relying on her only allies at the time. So it engages the reader's mind more. It treats the reader like an adult. So that's the number one thing I feel like everyone needs to take from George's writing is that idea. Every character is the hero of their own story, and use the unreliable narrator so that you can really get in that character's head and let the reader figure out who's right and wrong about stuff. I just think it's so delightful, and it's hard for me to read stuff that isn't written that way now. So summoning Ravis Reader. Hold on a second. Let me go back. This is not the one I meant to highlight. Something about genitalia in the chapter where Sansa's climbing the mountain. It's totally okay. Here it is. It keeps moving. Okay. I was able to notice the human genitalia in the Catelyn chapter climbing the mountains on her way to the Eyrie. So there is a whole line of symbolism about the Eyrie. There's like an inverted parallel thing that starts at the bottom and ends at the top, where the very top and the bottom mirror each other. And there's a lot of cool Weirwood symbolism. I don't remember the genitalia stuff, but I'm sure it's there because the reproductive symbolism is laced through all this. But yeah, feel free to elaborate on that if you want. There's definitely, George gets both very gross and vulgar and funny with the symbolism. It's not always like ethereal and lofty and magical and deep, although it's all those things. It's often very comical and bawdy and stuff. So we definitely laugh a lot decoding George's symbolism. Donnell Peoples with a 666 just to say, hey, Hail Satan. And Ducktastic says, totally off topic, but what's your necklace? It is a meteor, not a moon meteor, but it is a meteor. And it is from Russia. In Soviet Russia, moon meteor hit you. I did. I was saying I hit myself in the eye with it the other day, which is very Odin-like. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Lightbringer's all about dicks. When you see Lightbringer stabbing the moon, the comet stabbing the moon, or the sword stabbing the woman, or that's the impregnating penis from a certain angle. It's the Shiva Linga. There's lots of penises and wombs in mythology. We talk about the cosmic womb all the time. Space is the cosmic womb. It represents both the tomb. It's dark like the tomb, but it's also dark like the inside of the womb. And it's where things are born from. That's the whole idea of stars like dying and then birthing other stars when they die. So yeah, we can chuckle about it, but we also have to be grown-ups about it. It's, reproduction is important. That's the cycle of life. Like we talk about the nature cycle. That's just nature sex. Pollen is just nature sperm, guys, So, it is what it is. All of this reproduction stuff, it is, Lightbringer is all about dicks. I've said it many times. Many times. I really need a drink. I have some serious cotton mouth. I got a little bit of vitamin water left. Let's see if that could tide me over. I may have to go for a second one. So we're at an hour and a half on this live stream. I am going to wrap it up under 2 hours. I like to see the number under 2 hours. I think it's less intimidating. So we've got another 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. Yeah, Mira's net is a really good female sexuality symbol that we caught on to. She catches people in her net. So, yeah. Sponsorship, YouTube sponsorship happens at 30,000 subscribers, it turns out. Once I get to 30,000 subscribers, and I was meaning to mention this, thank you, Carla Karsnark, then I can do YouTube sponsorship, which is kind of like an easy Patreon. I think it's a monthly donation, and you get little perks. You get little cool badges and stickers in the chat and a couple other things. So you guys got to help me get to 30K. I just crossed 23K, which is awesome. because I was at like 15 a few months ago when we started the Ideas of March, Winds of Winter series, and I quickly got up to 20, and I'm already up to 23. So I'm sure I will get to 30 very soon with everyone's help. So share the word far and wide. What do you guys think of the Azor Ahai is a bad guy video? That's a little different than my normal videos. You know, talking morality and stuff like that. I've gotten a lot of really nice comments on that video, by the way. Thank you to everyone who's commented on that one. It is definitely something I care a lot about. Gabe's Logic says, could the name of Song of Ice and Fire represent the Norse worlds of, oh gosh, Muspelheim and Niflheim? Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Meaning to create the meeting. These two worlds meet to create the waters that brought life and the sparks that became the sun and stars. As you can see, I don't know how to pronounce those words. I'm only so-so on Norse mythology. I do know that the idea of a song of the song word in A Song of Ice and Fire definitely comes from Norse mythology. All of their stories are called songs. And the idea of ice and fire is also very Icelandic as far as the elements goes and stuff. So the title itself is definitely drawn from Norse myth. So I would guess that you're right about that. But I don't know enough to really answer the question. I do think about green magic as sort of being in the middle or mediating between ice and fire magic, and ice and fire being obviously very parallel. So that setup kind of works for me. Is a Quaid video in the works? Oh, yeah, that's another idea that I have talked about. Well, check out probably my Starry Wisdom video is the closest that I have to that. Great Empire of the Dawn, Church of Starry Wisdom. We went through all the Quaid stuff. I might do a little video about Marwyn. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Smitty wants to ask me about the morality of non-reproductive incest between consenting adults. 10-foot pole, Smitty. I'm not touching that one, bro. I mean, I'm not pro-incest. I'll say that. How do you tackle rereading the books for the third time? You know, at this point, I just float freely around and listen to chapters. I don't really. I did a reread for Danny. I did a character reread where I just reread all the Danny chapters. So maybe that's an answer to your question. You do learn a lot of things when you read just one person's chapters through. So that's a cool way to read the books. Yeah, so Brandon of the Bloody Blade, talking about the myth says that he slaughtered children of the forest and giants all over the Reach, and he turned Blue Lake red. Yeah, but Barbary Dustin, of course, talks about Brandon Stark, Ned's brother, and his bloody blade, quote unquote. And obviously, she's making a euphemism, an allusion to his penis, and specifically when he took her maiden's blood, or what, I don't know, how the fuck you want to say that. And Song of Ice and Fire parlance, all of those words they use are weird. But in any case, she lost her virginity to Brandon, and she talks about how he loved the sight of blood on his sword and using bloody swords and all the stuff. So George is giving us the metaphor very directly there. So when we see this historical figure of Brandon the Bloody Blade, and he's, you know, slaughtering children of the forest with his bloody blade, yes, this is most likely an allusion to him, you know, intermarrying with the children of the forest, or Starks doing that. And if you notice, right in that same area, we have Rose of Red Lake, who's a skin changer house that can still manifest skin changer abilities. So anytime we see skin changer abilities in a first man house, we know that they interbred with the child of the forest. So right, and they're telling me, so those two realms, Muspelheim and Niflheim, or whatever, however they're said, the realms of fire and ice, respectively. So yeah, that kind of tracks. Kind of tracks. All right, and we are at 1 hour and 39. I am going to go ahead and grab a drink real quick so I can finish up strong here, because I need a drink really bad. 1 second, guys. And we're back. We talking about the Green Men? I am going to make a Green Men video. My Green Men ideas are like 6 episodes deep into the Green Zombie series, and they're presented on a live stream, and they're really spread out. I'm going to condense that old one's Green Man stuff and make a short video because it's a really cool idea, and I want to get it out there before we see the Isle of Faces, which we might see that in the next book. Oh, Didelphimorphia. No, not at all. She asks, are you sure the Bloody Blade refers to intermarrying and not just the good old war rape? No, not at all. It probably all of the above. I'm not sure at that. I mean, I think probably both occurred. And yeah, it could have been either. I mean, I think we're supposed to assume that both occurred. And we're not really like Bran of the Bloody Blade probably isn't one person so much as a figure that represents the early Starks, who probably both warred on the Children of the Forest and intermarried with them. So I think that it probably happened both ways, yeah. There's plenty of war rape in A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, we obviously would never rule that out. But I do think that the Children of the Forest might have intermarried with humans on purpose as a way of co-opting them, because look at how the Children of the Forest, like, what are they doing with Bloodraven and Bran, right? Why do they need a human Greenseer at all? Well, one of the answers is because the numbers are so few of the Children of the Forest, and Greenseers are so rare that they don't, like, they need, it's more likely that they'll have a human Greenseer than they will a Children of the Forest Greenseer. But the other thing about that is that it's also like taming one of the wolves to guard the flock, which is a metaphor they use for one of the Gardener Kings of the Reach when the Andals come. And he talks about, he's like, well, if you capture a wolf and teach it to guard your flock, then, you know, that's better as opposed to just fighting the wolves. And so think about that with the Children of the Forest, right? They, by having a human Greenseer and by having the first men convert to Weirwood worship, they are co-opting the worldview of the first men. Like Bloodraven thinks like the children, essentially. He thinks about preserving the land more than he does thinking about individual human motivations, I think. So the Children of the Forest definitely could have interbred with humans for specific reasons. So will Bran become a broodmare for female Children of the Forest? I don't think so. I think it's implied that Bran can't do that. So I don't think that's his destiny anyways. Does Tyrion have Child of the Forest symbolism? Well, he easily could because he's short, and he does have one green eye. But I have not caught that. Have I? Guys, think. I've got so many essays. Have we ever found Child of the Forest symbolism with Tyrion? I don't think so. He's got like Monkey Man and Gargoyle symbolism. But he seems to be like a Loki figure. He seems to be doing Azor Ahai stuff, like, you know, meddling with things and, you know, blowing stuff up. But there could be some Last Hero type stuff there, but I'll have to think about that. Not that I have found. Not that I have found. Arya has a ton of Child of the Forest symbolism, that's for sure. Do you think there are different types of Children of the Forest? Yes. You talk about how they could be part lizard. Or do you think they simply vary depending on where they live? So we're given, they nicknamed 6 Children of the Forest in the caves. Snowy Locks, Coals, Scales, Black Knife, Leaf, like one other one. And so, hey, it's a last-minute Quinn's chat cameo. Hey, Quinn. Quinn's out running errands somewhere. So I assume that his vehicle is stopped, that he is not chatting and driving, of course, because you should never do that. That's very unsafe. And Quinn is a very safe person. But hi, Quinn. Thanks for tuning in. In any case, what was I talking about? I'm distracted so easily. Oh, the different kinds of Child of the Forest. So those nicknames are interesting, right? Snowy Locks implies one of them has white hair. Coals, that's easy because we're told their golden eyes burn like coals. So that's easy. Black knife, well, they carry around obsidian knives, so that's easy. One of them is called scales, which implies that part of their skin might look scaly. We're told often that their skin is dappled like a fawn or like a doe, which just means spotted, essentially. However, it's only through that name scales that it's implied that they have scales. However, they do have black claws and four-fingered hands, and they have slitted eyes like a cat. But of course, many reptiles, including snakes, also have those slitted cat's eyes. So when you look at scales, black claws, and those potentially reptilian eyes, then they start looking a lot like lizard people. This idea comes from LaDonna, from the James of Thrones YouTube channel, which is a very cool YouTube channel. And that's his mom, actually, LaDonna, who comes on the channel. And this is her big idea that the children of the forest are actually lizard people. Lizard people usually live in a cave. And Bloodraven is a blood of the dragon person. The dragon bond potentially might have something to do with green seer magic. And in particular, the Great Empire of the Dawn and the Azor High, pre-Valerian Dragon Lord people came to Westeros. Most likely reason is to mess with the children of the forest. So we have a lot of potential for dragon, very early dragon lords to be having contact with the children of the forest. And so if they actually are lizard people, that would be like, wouldn't that be just a huge mind-blowing twist if we learned that the idea of people who are the blood of the dragon, who are part dragon, part reptilian, it actually has something to do with the children of the forest being lizard people and intermarrying with children of the forest. Wouldn't that be wild? That would be a fun way to bring the dragon Valerian Dany plotline and tie it in with the Green Seer Children of the Forest stuff. So that's got some potential. We'll have to see. So that's kind of what I'm saying. Is it possible that the Children of the Forest and the dragons are related? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Exactly. That is what I'm saying. And we have all these other various kinds of lizard people in the Far East. But like I said, you could look at the Children of the Forest like lizard people. So they just live in the woods. Now, the Children of the Forest, that's not to deny their obvious elf symbolism. They play the role of elves. They hang out with the trees. They guard the sacred trees. They're doing all the classic elf stuff, but they're just a little creepier and bloodthirsty. I shouldn't say creepier then, but among all the elf mythology, they are definitely on the bloodthirsty, creepy side of things. Okay, they might be serving Bran jellied brains of his friend. I mean, we don't see that in Rivendell, right? So, yeah, I would like it if there was a connection there, but that doesn't change the fact that they're still playing the role of tree elves. They just might have some sort of lizard connection. And that would obviously be a way to establish control over dragons is, skin-changing magic. Will we see Euron with a tentacle beard in the Winds of Winter? Well, that depends on how much Shade of the Evening you drink, apparently, because when Aeron Damphair drinks Shade of the Evening, he does see Euron, Cthulhu face. So, no, I don't think we'll literally see it, but I do think that the Euron stuff will go as far as Martin could possibly take it. And I would like to see, it'd be funny if some sea monster came out of the ocean and just swallowed Euron at some key moment. It's like, oh, well, he's one with Cthulhu now. And yes, Dany's deformed lizard baby, as well as many other deformed lizard babies, indicate that there is actual reptilian DNA in the Valerian bloodline. And again, you should check out Great Empire of the Dawn. It is called Dracomorph. And linked in the description are 2 videos from Crowfoot's daughter about Blood of the Dragon origins that are also must-watch TV. Yeah, Aeron was tripping balls, that's for sure. I'll just remind you guys, on the way out of the live stream, please leave a comment. That really helps the stream get seen. Tell me what was good, tell me what was bad, leave a question that I didn't get, anything like that. And we've got about 10 minutes or so, a little bit less. So if you have any final questions, get them in. I will make one more point about the Joseph Campbell stuff, right? So me get to this. So mythology, remember how I was talking about the importance of symbolic art and why it's important that A Song of Ice and Fire and Star Wars and things like that are performing the functions of myth? Well, it's because the functions of myth, it used to serve a lot of roles. And Joseph Campbell isolated 4 different roles. He talked about the metaphysical function of myth, which is awakening a sense of awe before the mystery of being. So according to Campbell, the mystery of life, which what he called transcendent reality, cannot be captured directly in words or images. Symbols and mythic metaphors, on the other hand, point outside themselves and into that reality. They are what Campbell called being statements, and their enactment through ritual can give to the participant a sense of that ultimate mystery as an experience. So here's a quote from Campbell. It says, mythological symbols touch and exhilarate centers of life beyond the reach of reason and coercion. The first function of mythology is to reconcile waking consciousness to the awe-inspiring mystery of this universe as it is. So it's a way of approaching the sacred, essentially. That's the metaphysical function. Oh, I got a couple super chats rolling in. Let me grab those. Matthew Paris says, and I guess I have to come back to Campbell in a second. Bloodraven says he means to pull white walls down stone by stone in the Mystery Night. Ah, yes, White Walls has a lot of moon stuff. So think Bloodraven could pull down the ice moon. Well, I think maybe let's just start with the idea of pulling down moons, period, with Greenseer magic. Like I talked about in my timeline Hammer of the Waters video, I think the Hammer of the Waters is a moon meteor. Hammer of the Waters was supposedly called down by the Greenseers, and I think that's more or less right when we understand that Azor Ahai was some sort of evil Greenseer or someone who usurped the magic of the Greenseers to break the moon. So yes, Bloodraven pulling white walls down stone by stone absolutely is Weirwood magic being used to break the moon talk. And he makes a cool smoky pyre, which gives us a very cool mushroom cloud smoke tree symbolism that rises in the last scene. So lots of good stuff in the Duncan egg. And that's probably some stuff I need to get into. I've got some unreleased episodes with Duncan egg symbolism broken down that I need to put out. So yeah, good catch there, Matthew. Nice one. Good eye. Gabe's Logic says, could we set up a forum outside of your streams to send you questions and have your answers posted publicly? It would be fun to see all past answers. Well, there's 2 places you can do that. One is on Twitter, @TheDragonLML. I always like it when people ask me questions on Twitter because I'll answer publicly, and a bunch of other fun people will then jump in and contribute, and it will become a group discussion. That's a very cool way to do it. And the other way would, of course, be our Discord, which Pat Riley started. And the Lucifer Means Lightbringer Discord is turning into a pretty fun place to go and kick around stuff like this. And we are just about to create a forum for submitting questions, just like what you were saying, that I could then take on live streams and answer. So if somebody can post the Discord link, I would appreciate it, or I'll pull it up in a minute if Pat Riley is not hanging around. So there you go. So getting back to Campbell real quick, this is just pretty short here. The second function, the cosmological function, is explaining the shape of the universe. So for pre-modern societies, myth functioned as like a proto-science, essentially, offering explanations for the physical phenomena that surrounded and affected their lives, such as the change of the seasons and the life cycle of animals and plants. So perceiving nature as the green man who dies in the fall and rises in the spring, that's just a way of understanding the cycle of nature. It's not a matter of thinking that the green man is real. He's a personification of a natural truth. And so much of myth is like that. And that's a lot of what we talk about here. Just talking about the Hammer of the Waters as this hammer that was called down from heavens and smashed the earth. You know, that's just a way of talking about a meteor, right? So it's a proto-science. Myth functions it gives a sociological function, which means that it validates and supports the existing social order. So ancient societies had to conform to an existing social order if they were to survive, quite often. This is because they evolved under pressure from necessities more intense than the ones encountered in our modern world. Talking about like hunter-gatherer existence, you know. Mythology confirmed that order and enforced it by reflecting it into the stories themselves, often describing how the order arrived from divine intervention. Campbell often referred to these conformity myths as the right-hand path to reflect the brain's left hemisphere's abilities for logic, order, and linearity. So this is the least magical function of myth. It's almost, you could say, the dogmatic function of myth, but it doesn't have to be dogma. You know, these can be like cultural values can be communicated through myth. That's another way to say it. So together with these myths, he observed the existence of the left-hand path, mythic patterns like the hero's journey, which are revolutionary in character, and that they demand from the individual a surpassing of social norms and sometimes even of morality. So yeah, there's a whole thing. And Euron is doing that, where he is like intentionally violating social norms as a way of sort of shocking people. And the last one is the pedagogical function, which means guiding the individual through the stages of life. So this is, as a person goes through life, many psychological challenges will be encountered. Myth may serve as a guide for successful passage through the stages of one's life. So you can see all the roles of mythology, and translating this back into our existence. Like sometimes when you're going through a tough circumstance, you might think of one of your favorite characters from a story, whether it's a story, you know, a real story from history or a fictional story, and you may draw inspiration from them. I mean, it happens all the time, especially if you love stories, and especially if you spend a lot of time in these stories. You might compare yourself to these various figures. You might say, what would Daenerys do? And so, yeah, these myths are functioning in all of these ways. I don't know about proto-science necessarily, because obviously we have real science now, but it's definitely doing the metaphysical function, where it's inspiring a sense of awe. And we're definitely seeing that the myths of A Song of Ice and Fire encode the cultural values of the various people. So you look at the Ironborn myth, and it's got all the values of the Ironborn in there. And like I said, there's a lot of the use of archetypes with the characters of A Song of Ice and Fire gives us that pedagogical function, where the transformational steps of a character's growth are reflected in the mythical archetypes that they parallel. So, because I used the word transformation in my first essay so much that I made a Transformers joke out of it, because Martin is very captivated in the personal growth and these cycles of myth, you know, the cycles going around, one phase giving way to another phase, rebirth as a metaphor for personal growth. And so he gravitates towards the myths that are very dynamic, and he gravitates towards those transformational moments in the myth to parallel onto the characters, so that we see the characters growing in this sort of magical way. And all of that takes time. Sorry, guys. Apparently, like, it takes 10 years. Like I said, I do think that now that the show is over, it should come faster. And COVID is forcing him to isolate, and that will make him go faster. So I have hopes that Winds of Winter is coming soon, but it's not going to be like next month soon. I think maybe it'd be reasonable to hope that he finishes it by the end of the year or something. You know, but whatever, just hang tight, hang right here with the Dragon LML, and we'll keep talking myth and symbol. We're kind of just using A Song of Ice and Fire as a bridge to talk about mythology and symbol and all these other fun things, psychology, interpersonal stuff, politics occasionally, when I want to get angry comments, you know, on my YouTube videos. So just chill. We'll ride together. We'll have fun. There's lots to talk about until Winds comes. And then when Winds comes, we'll obviously go crazy. We'll go through the book together. We'll have lots of fun. So there you go, guys. It's been real. It's been a fun stream. And I will, like I said, I'm going to get that Others video, Others Kingsguard, out hopefully in a few days. And I'm sure I'll have a live stream this weekend at some point as well. And like I said, on Friday, I'm going to do something for Dark, either on this channel or on the Sick Podcast Creatist Est channel. So make sure you follow me on social media so that you know what's up. But I'll spread the word. I'll probably, if I do it on the other channel, I'll probably go live on this channel first just to make sure everyone sees it, and I'll bring you over to the other stream, something like that. But in any case, watch Dark, subscribe to Netflix. We're just under 2 hours, so peace, love, and understanding. See you guys later.